I think we might be live. Let's hope we're all live. Hello, everybody, on this lovely, lovely Friday afternoon. We couldn't have asked for a better one for reunion weekend, wouldn't you know? We're not on campus, but it's gorgeous. So hello again. I'm Rhodey Lloyd from the Alumni Relations team here at Bowdoin, and I'm also a member of the class of 1980. And I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon for this event. This is a conversation between Tony Doerr from Bowdoin's class of 1995 and a 2017 honorary degree recipient, and Brock Clarke, who is Bowdoin's A. Leroy Greason Professor of English and the chair of our English department. So Tony, we're thrilled to have you with us today from Boise, Idaho. Tony lives there with his twin sons and his wife, Shauna, whom he met while they were both students here at Bowdoin. Tony is the author of 2 short story collections, a memoir, and the novels About Grace and All the Light We Cannot See, which, as you're probably all aware, was awarded the 2015 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, was a #1 New York Times bestseller, and is now being adapted as a limited series by Netflix. Professor Brock Clarke is an award-winning author of 7 works of fiction, including the best-selling An Arsonist's Guide to Writers' Homes in New England. Brock lives close by with his family here in Portland, where he just wrapped up the semester teaching 2 classes remotely. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's what I get paid for.
There you go. After Tony and Brock share their thoughts, they'll leave time to address your questions. So please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to submit your question. We'll get through as many as we can. And closed captioning is available for today's discussion, and you'll find that button on your screen as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now I'm pleased to welcome Tony Doerr and Brock Clarke. Thanks, gents.
Thanks, Rhodey.
Thank you, Rhodey.
Hey, Tony.
What's up, man?
What's it like there? Good, yeah. Your Bowdoin hat. I don't have mine. I have my robe back there. I could put.
Oh yeah.
That's a little creepy. So what is it like there? Like, to give me a sense of like what the weather's like, at least.
Oh, the weather's utterly gorgeous. It's it's a little hot early, but it's beautiful. The low snowpack, but that means right now the rivers are beautiful and clear and moving fast. And it's been, I mean, we've just been so unbelievably blessed during the stay-at-home period to have space and trails and be able to exercise outside. And, friends in Italy who had to have an affidavit to go outdoors, even just to get groceries or go to the farmacia, you have to have a piece of paper. So, every day we could go for walks and runs. It was so nice. How about you guys?
I mean, it's beautiful here now. I did a fair amount of griping. Like, all right, enough of that. I did a fair amount of griping early on. We had a really wet, cold spring, but now it's premature summer and it's unbelievably. So today we went for this hike, maybe a half hour from Portland in Westbrook, which is just the town. It's an industrial town to the west of Portland, but there are these beautiful trails, including one that ends up at this alewife pond. We could watch the alewives trying to swim up the rapids, which was incredible. I know, so we had this beautiful thing. Meanwhile, the world is just going to hell. Well, at least we could look at the pretty fish doing their remarkable things. I know, incredible time. We can talk more about that in a bit, but I wanted to ask you, I want to work from something you just said recently, and then we can talk about whatever. I don't have an agenda. I read this interview from you, and I want to make sure I get it right, so I'm going to read from it. You're talking about how basically fiction never, I think you're talking specifically about fiction, not fiction. Fiction can never actually do justice to the thing it's trying to describe. Like the line is something, does this ring a bell? This is just only like—
Sure. Or maybe language can, I feel that. Like I'm always fumbling. Language is this invented human thing, and you're fumbling to describe things that are ultimately beyond language, what it means to be alive for this really short period on the earth in this incredibly old universe that we live in. And, I think Flaubert said something of Madame Bovary. It was something like, we long to make music to melt the stars, but we're really just bears hammering on pots on the floor of a tavern or something. That's how I feel all the time. The violin you're trying to play in your mind, you're like, this is going to be beautiful. I'm going to make this perfect. I'm really going to connect all these centuries right now in this paragraph. And then you wake up and you read it and it's terrible. That's kind of what writing is. You're failing to achieve the ideal that you imagined late at night.
See, this could be seen as depressing, but I find it kind of inspiring. But I'm wondering if we find it inspiring in different ways. So is your idea is your idea that we get as close as we can with the words to what we're actually describing? Or is it that, we're going to fail, but what matters is the failure is interesting? I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think the latter. I'd love to hear you, because there's humor in the failure, of course, and humanity in it. But I think sometimes, especially for them, so many folks listening, almost all high achievers, you went to Bowdoin and you got into Bowdoin. So you're used to like setting out and doing something and doing it well, whether it's field hockey or, participating in an orchestra. And so sometimes the fear of failure can stop you from trying. And as I'm aging, I keep having to remind myself the beauty is just in the attempt. Try it. It's okay to suck at things. Just try them. If you want to grow old and be curious and be open, try quilting or pick up knitting. Try something, go to a country, hopefully we can soon, where nobody's speaking English, and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and be okay with failing. And every day I think I have to get to that place. I have to overcome a little fear. Even now, still, every time I sit down to write, it's okay if this doesn't come out as well as I hoped it would. Right. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, it could work in a couple ways, right? For me, I tell my students this all the time, and you're right about Bowdoin people in particular. They've often been winners. In one way, they've succeeded, right? And the students have succeeded in getting into the college, which is really hard. But for me, what makes people much more interesting is their failure. Because failure can be, it depends what the stakes are, of course, but failure can be endearing, right? There's that great, so we talked like 3 years ago. So if we start like wheeling out the same lines, then people are just going to have to forgive us. But there's that great Donald Barthelme line, the fiction writer Donald Barthelme, where he says something like, I'd rather have a wreck than a ship that sails, things attach themselves to wrecks. I just love that because that's true, right? I think I'm much more interested in people talking about, self-deprecatingly talking about their failures than I am hearing about their successes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the most interesting people are the ones who failed. And I don't think that's only true in the arts or the humanities either. Science is all about failing. It's, half the Mars missions have smashed into the planet or sailed past the planet. And it doesn't mean people give up. Those people have to undergo so much adaptability and despair when you spend 8 years planning some little servo on some module that might scoop up a little dust. And then the whole thing burns up and you're like, what am I going to do for the next 8 years? And you overcome that. And so, hopefully with the pandemic, scientists are becoming more humanized too, and more kids are interested in going into science and seeing that, those aren't just saints in white coats, although obviously doctors are performing heroic things right now, but those aren't perfect people either. We're all just people. And I would think, certainly the most interesting folks, whether I met them at Bowdoin or not, are folks who have undergone some kind of big failure in their lives.
Yeah, and this could be smaller or large, right? The smaller ones are often funny because they're anecdotal. I find the stories of failure to be more inspiring sometimes than failures of success because they're often told by people who've done good things. They're like, oh, if that person could screw up and still become this person, then, I got a chance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With this is our 25th reunion. So I went on a run before this. I was trying to reflect on what the heck that even means. I know, so many folks on here have a milestone that they might be tuning in just because to try to get some Bowdoin atmosphere in their lives. And I've been thinking about how, my generation, we were really like the USA dream team, American flags everywhere. American exceptionalism was just believed in. We had winning the Cold War, the Berlin Wall's going down, and we have the coolest stuff, and we have Michael Jordan, and everybody wants McDonald's in their countries now. And now, this kind of loss of innocence coming in my 40s where you realize, oh, maybe American exceptionalism is a story that we all believed in, but we are struggling to contain this virus, and we're arguing about whether we should wear masks in grocery stores. And maybe we are not always the most exceptional country. And, that's another maybe it's kind of a failure. It's important to remember that everything, even the American experiment, can fail. And even these institutions that we've relied on for so long, freedom of speech and the purity of the courts, those things are not infallible, and they're being attacked in many different ways right now. And it's up to us to try to keep this experiment going from failing.
And I wonder if I had another thing, but so I want to go, let's go this way. I like the idea that humility has something intrinsic to do with the arts. I'd not thought about this till now, but this notion that, and I'd love to hear if this jives with what you feel or not, but I've always felt that in writing, you have to have the sense that you have something to offer, while also this notion of humility that says to you, that's a ridiculous thing to think. So on one hand, you're just not out there grandstanding, but somewhere inside you believe like, yeah, I'm going to nail this and it's going to change some lives. Like, I'm just wondering like how you get through bad writing days. I mean, that's
a great question.
Just survival. Yeah.
And of course, you know, having two white males in the conversation already like assumes, you know, it's like, it's easier for us growing up to assume we're allowed to have something to say than it is for lots of
that's right.
folks. But still, yeah, I mean, growing up in rural Cleveland with basically no money, it wasn't like my parents had authors over for dinner ever. It wasn't like I even ever met an author until I got to Bowdoin, somebody who'd written a book. So it wasn't like I thought I had any permission to say anything. Or so it is a kind of a great act of hubris on one hand to say, like, look, Brock can make a book, you know? and yet at the same time, every voice is super important. And, you know, I'm certainly not saying anybody has to pick up my books. I think it's just something I need to make as a way to try to understand the world and go through the world. And ultimately it becomes a practice that you need to stay sane. Storytelling and the careful arrangement of language is something that I rely on just as a kind of almost as a way of working out. It's something you kind of have to do every day or every other day to stay healthy. And there is humility every day in doing that. I think it's kind of like prayer or a practice. What do you think?
Right. It involves a kind of faith, right? That somehow this will work out if you keep at it. But it also has that sense of, well, I didn't work out yesterday, but it worked out at some point in the past, so maybe it will. I mean, it's this interesting.
It's fundamentally optimistic because you're assuming a stranger in Tampa Bay can read your work and read your paragraphs and see something. It may not be precisely the image you saw in your mind or the feeling you were trying to harness and put inside of a net, but maybe that reader feels something too, and that's absolutely miraculous. You just use little black marks and these little hieroglyphics that are free to use, and somebody across the globe was maybe moved by that. And even more powerful than that is, you know, Anne Frank does this in her attic and then she dies and those words still move people now, you know, so that transcends not only place, but time and even death. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea, right? For me, partly it's a two-part process. One is whatever I'm contributing, but when I stink at that, I at least have books to go to that have always given me pleasure, and new books that will bring me new pleasure that the kind I've never had before. That's a really heartening process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe, I don't want to speak for you, but maybe both of us came to it as readers first, and being in love with books, finding voices that when you're 16 years old and you read whatever it was, Jack Kerouac or Stephen King or Virginia Woolf, whoever said something that you felt recognized for the first time in your life. James Baldwin identifies some feeling that you had. That magic.
I mean, and you have kids also. I don't want to get too gushy about this, although we can. But this isn't my kid. We bought books the other day, and three of them were for my 11-year-old son, and I gave him one of them, and he immediately, it's like a fucking squirrel with a nut, takes the book and just like a zombie goes off to his bedroom to read it. And I was like, that is about the sweetest thing. Like, this is a thing this guy's been looking forward to for however many days, and now he has it, and he's going to just bury himself in it.
Oh gosh, yeah, that means you've succeeded. Whereas I'm just feeling with failure feelings right now because my kids are running to their bedrooms to Snapchat some horrific thing, and then they're like, "Oh, let's watch some show that's rated X that nobody even."
My kids do that too, but they do that only with me. You mentioned earlier about like someone in Tampa, the hypothetical person in Tampa reading work. I'm wondering, like, as you've continued to write and your audience has grown a lot bigger, whether you have a different sense of your work needing to reach more people, or you needing to do things to have more people read your books or to maintain your readership, or whether that's the last thing you have in mind?
Like publicity things, that's the last thing I have in mind because it all scares the crap out of me. I get anxious. I don't like any of it at all. I'm not on Twitter. Facebook seems like it's contributing to the decay of our society in a lot of ways, so I'm not interested in it.
I sort of mean more like the books themselves, like whether your sense like, oh, this book, if I do these things, I don't mean in a kind of calculating audience way. I mean as I want this book to reach, intellectually, creatively, whatever way, as many people as possible, and whether that affects decisions in the writing process.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think so. I think some of the fear that I have to overcome each day that I start could be because of that. I'm worried that like, oh, now more people are going to be emailing my publisher to tell me all the stuff I got wrong, which, fills me with horror. This is just a corollary, but you're trying to knit together a dream. John Gardner's famous thing where like when you write fiction, you're building a dream, a continuous dream for your reader to kind of have it trawl in front of your reader's consciousness. And anytime you make a mistake, you break that dream and the reader wakes up. And sometimes it's as simple as just getting the wrong bird in Maine in winter, and they're like, there's no robins in December in Maine. This book sucks. And they throw it away. But especially writing lately, a lot of stuff set in the past, I'll just blow it on some simple detail, like a ballpoint pen in the hand of somebody in 1941. And I just get crushed. I try to remind myself, novels are a living document. You can't get everything right. It's all about embracing your own humanity and your failures. But often that paralyzes me. Like, okay, why even begin? I'm going to get all this wrong. My new project is set about maybe a third of it is set in the 15th century, like getting the meals people eat right and the stuff they wear and not sounding like Game of Thrones all the time. Like he threw his cloak on and grabbed his dagger. You're like, oh. So sometimes it's that. And then other times, to your larger question, I think ultimately you just have to have faith that if you're writing about feeling confused, feeling lost, mourning, grief, humor, missing your parents, missing home, those things are ultimately what all humans feel and have felt through history. And if ironically, the more specific you make something, the more individual you make something, the more universal it becomes. So it's sometimes by scrabbling towards the little tiny chips of mica in the pavement that you reach the stars. And so you have to stay focused on the mica and not worry if the reader in Tampa is going to get it, because ultimately I think he or she will. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that seems right. And I think like I don't tend to work. I don't really write. Most of my novels, some of them being satire, are set in the here and now. So I think that you can get away with not getting some things right because in some ways you're not trying to get them right. You're trying to do other things. But I think about it now. So, but in writing about a contemporary moment, you have the obligation to write about things that matter in the contemporary moment. I guess my sense is I write about things that I think matter, but they matter to me in ways that are different than they matter to other people. And I guess I just have to trust that my way will be interesting or unnerving enough for people to want to pay attention to it or be entertained by it or something. That's
absolutely. Yeah. But what's the name of the town? Congress, or what's the name of the town in this book? Yeah. You have this. I don't totally remember, but there's this moment in the beginning. You're like, you describe the town really specifically. You're like, there's the houses around the green, the white clapboard houses, and then there's another fringe of houses around that. And then you're like, and beyond that is the things that are in all the other towns, like this town. But because there's the boat ramp and the lake and the motorboats in the distance, it's still one specific place. And what I see a lot of times in student work is they'll say, well, I didn't really give any specificity to where my characters were doing things because I wanted it to be universal. I wanted it to be any place, USA, or any time. And ironically, I think it's when you really drill down, when you set it in a neighborhood in Boston, you get the dialect right, you get what people are wearing right, you get the exact year right, what birds are in the skies and what music is coming out of the cars passing. That's ultimately when you start telling a story that can transcend its own time and place.
Yeah, I get that from students all the time. Like, I wanted the reader to be able to fill in their own the details that I should have filled in as my job as a writer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because it's exhausting. That's the
Yeah, it's
thing.
hard, right? And because
When
you don't want to do the same details that other people have in the same way. So you have to
Right.
sort of, okay, I'm not going to do that, but what is the other thing I can do that other people can't? And that's hard.
Exactly.
So I want to hear about. So I think 3 years ago you talked about a novel. I think this must be the same novel that you were working on. That was, my memory was that it was set in the 15th century and that maybe Turkey was involved in one way.
Yeah, good memory. Yeah, that's
But
nice.
there were also spaceships, right? Or
Yes.
something. Yeah. So that's the same. And I remember saying to you,
That's
it's like the worst kind of enabler. I think you said like your publisher was nervous about the spaceships. I was like, no, you just go for the spaceships. I cannot wait.
I did. I went for it. The great gift of this job we do is that you can leave the world for a while. And so since my deadline was Christmas and I blew it, which was disappointing. I got a little depressed after that for a week or two. But then I just kept grinding. And except for a week off in early March with some Bowdoin friends, I just worked like 12-hour days, 7 days a week. So the nice gift of our job, at least for me, was that as the pandemic began, and the kids were out of school and everything's kind of falling apart, I had this space. I just felt like I had this project that was moving downhill at that point, thankfully. And so I was able to just kind of flee and build that out. And so some ways I think I'm behind on the kind of grief of the pandemic versus some of my friends, because just now am I making time to like read the whole Washington Post, and you're like, oh my gosh, no idea. We didn't even have masks in the beginning and stuff because I was just working. I was so lucky to still have a job and still be able to buy groceries. And so anyway, I managed to send a draft on, I think it was on May 12th.
That's great.
It has Spaceship still in it. Yeah, Spaceship.
What's it called right now?
Right now it's called Cloud Cuckooland. Have you ever heard that phrase, Brock?
Never. No. What is it?
It's used in Ireland, still in England. It was a phrase invented by the Greek playwright Aristophanes in his play The Birds. It's like a fantasy land that somebody kind of, maybe it has a hint of delusion in it, like you can travel to Cloud Cuckooland where everything will be great. And if anybody remembers the Lego movie, I think it was the first Lego movie, at one point they traveled to Cloud Cuckooland, which was a kind of a great wink. Clearly somebody on the writing staff had read some Greek drama at a school like Bowdoin, maybe. But I don't know. My editor doesn't thrilled about the title because she thinks, most Americans don't know it. And I get that. And it also sounds a little silly, with the word cuckoo in it. But I do like it. It's threaded through the whole book. And there's a book inside the book, an old Greek novel. The Greeks actually did write novels amidst the epic poetry and drama. And many of them they were kind of considered a lower form of literature. And many of them involved travel to utopian places. And it was never clear if these were invented places or if the writer supposedly had traveled to them, where people lived 200 years and fruit was ripe all the time and there was tons of food everywhere. And that power of that utopian literature is really interesting to me, especially as my kids watch dystopian movie after dystopian movie. They're really steeped in it. They loved all those Marvel movies where the world incinerates in every single film.
Oh my God.
It wasn't enough to destroy New York. They have to destroy the earth.
There's a brief thing, my kids and I, when my older son came home from college, because he had to, because everyone had to, we were like, all right, we're going to watch he's a film and creative writing major. He's like, we're going to watch a movie a night and we're each going to pick one in turn. And I think my youngest son, someone picked the most recent Avengers one, which is about the world ending. And then the next one, which my older son picked, was a Japanese post-World War II movie, which is about anime, which is about the world ending. I was like, guys, are you not paying attention out there? Could we not do something a little more happy right now, a little more lighthearted? So yeah, I feel your pain.
Right. So I do have obviously bad things happen in the novel, but the novel inside the novel that I invent, there's been, fragments are still being discovered in like trash dumps in Egypt. And so I just posit the rediscovery of one of these old books, and it travels through 5 readers through time. And I think, and I'm also recreating the book inside the book. And so I think that book is a quite hopeful, silly little book. And each of these readers going through much more dire things need this book at certain points in their lives. So it's I hope, a kind of tribute to reading and to libraries and to the people who preserve books, and why do certain books get to last when so many things from human bodies to temples to whole cultures are removed from the earth and time.
It sounds great. It sounds so. Have you ever read The History of the Siege of Lisbon by Jose Saramago? I may have the details wrong here, but I think the protagonist is either an editor or a translator, and he changes some detail in a book he's working on, and then it just changes everything else as the novel goes on. And it's really funny, but it's also kind of sinister and sad in the same way. So it sounds like the kind of thing you're working with.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, and I love Saramago. He wrote a book called Blindness. Folks might remember that, so kind of maybe very apt right now, might be hard to read right now, but certainly about a pandemic sweeping through the globe. And that's cool. I'm glad to learn about that. That sounds very similar. Hopefully not too similar to what I.
No, it doesn't sound like the book within the book is not as prominent as what you're talking about. This sounds great, though. I can't wait.
Thanks. What are you working on?
I was thinking about this. I had begun a novel, which I was really into, and then, our lives changed, which is fine. I kept plugging away at it. When I would have been, you were talking about writing downhill. If I had been writing downhill when all this started, I would have been able to keep writing. But then I was just sort of on a flat surface, and I knew I was going to write my way into trouble, and then didn't have the time to think my way out of it. So I'm trying to think my way out of it right now. But whatever. There are worse.
Giving yourself permission to do that right now is so important. Like, I don't want to suggest that my story is like what artists should be doing right now. Like, it's not easy when the kids are home all the time and you're there really the only adult in their lives. Now they're starting to go out a little bit at least, but it was painful. And you're like just managing just their Netflix and their Snapchat addictions is so hard because that's often the only way you can get time to get your work done.
Yeah, but that's right. But this is just an exaggerated version of what we always have, right? There are always things in life that sort of peck away. I was going to ask this question. I'm going to ask it anyways, even though it probably doesn't pertain because you were finishing a novel, not in the middle of one or writing one. But I've talked to a lot of, I've been talking to writer friends. Some of them are like, yeah, whatever I was working on before doesn't seem to have as much juice anymore. I don't feel that way, in part because I don't think of novels quite that way. But yeah, I'm wondering what your sense of, I guess, not the role of the writer. Like, it's okay, so you're going to be writing on something new eventually. Whether what's going on now, and not just the pandemic, but what's going on in Minneapolis, what's going on in Louisville, all of these life-changing things, whether you have an obligation in some ways to wrestle with them, or whether that's not an obligation, you have an obligation in life, and then art may or may not do what you're doing in life, or it might do something separate. I'm just wondering what your sense of this is.
Yeah, thanks to hear what you say, because that's a lifelong question. I remember feeling like that after 9/11, after Katrina, after the election of Trump. I had a few weeks where I was just reading the news and like learning the names of the vice minister of the FBI or whatever, like I knew the names of so many cabinet guys because I was so in like just caught up in the whole narrative. So I know that these things happen, and you have to kind of remember the novel is not always the place to break news. The novel is a place to kind of find meaning, in what it means to be alive at a particular moment. Mm-hmm. And you can never predict, and all the light we can see. I knew I was grappling with how technology affected power, and how the radio coming into into Europe in the 20s and 30s, how people decided to harness that technology to manipulate the truth. I knew that was a big element of the novel, but it was rare that I would sit down and be like, this is going to be directly relevant to how Twitter and Facebook are being used right now. It was just more solving the problems of the book itself. Mm-hmm. Obviously, then later you go on a walk and you do have those existential fears like, oh, great, now there's a global pandemic and I have all these people like hugging each other. Yeah. So in the novel I did, because I figured it would be published in 2021, I did have a lot of the climactic events occurring in 2021, and I tucked them back to 2020 because I have a little play, 5 6th graders and an older man put on a play of this old Greek novel, and they all have to be around each other. The library has to be open for it to happen. They have to be able, they have to be allowed to go be right next to and breathe on an older man. So I did have to make some changes, but ultimately, I absolutely understand when people say, you know, my work feels a little bit meaningless right now, but you're going through a big change. It's also important to not overstate when you're living through history how big these things are. Like unfortunately for carbon use, we are all going to fly on airplanes again. You know, there may be, what is it? The Columbia, or no, he's the new NYU professor, Scott Galloway. He calls coronavirus the accelerant, the great accelerant. And so, you know, there will be big changes, things like department stores, which are on their way out, or maybe, you know, maybe malls may not survive. And maybe higher education is going to have to go through some pretty significant changes too. You never know. But I don't think that our lives are going to so fundamentally change that the novels people were halfway through at the beginning of the pandemic are totally irrelevant now.
That's right, right. I think that's just a high-minded way of, sometimes a high-minded way of saying, yeah, I just got really distracted and sad. and it's hard to work, which is totally, I understand that.
Yeah. So many of us use the same machine that we write our books on. You also use that machine to like access this information that can be really despair-inducing. So. Yeah. You know, in my ideal world, maybe I could separate those two.
Yeah, right. And that's a practical problem, right? The thing that you're trying to produce, this thing, is connected to all these other things that may or may not be relevant to the thing you're producing, and may in fact get in the way of it. So,
right.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I was just thinking about your books up till now, and I didn't realize that there's kind of a pattern. Like you've been alternating short story collections and novels, and then you have the memoir in the middle. And then this is the first book that's going to break the pattern. Are you still working on stories at all?
Yeah. And I've been writing them as procrastination a lot, because for all these reasons we're talking about, sometimes you feel like you hit a dead end, you write yourself into a problem. Like you just said, you know, you're like, this, you know, and every project you get this initial energy, and I don't mean just writing. I'm sure many folks out there can feel this, whether you're a songwriter or quilter, you know, the initial burst, you're like, I'm going to make this is going to be cool. And then maybe 3 or 4 days in, you're like, kind of running out of that first little juice. And then often in the case of a novel, that can carry you a few months, but then you're in this thorny bramble mess that you made for yourself. Yeah. So what I'll tend to do, if I don't, now that magazines don't really make any money anymore, you know, for a long time, I just wrote for magazines. Right. And that whole world has changed so much since we graduated from Bowdoin. I feel like I write short stories maybe as a way to say I can finish something, to prove to myself, okay, I can finish something. And the stakes are always a little smaller, maybe because like the early question you asked me about how many readers do you think about, you know, there are just a lot fewer readers for short stories. And also if it totally caves in and you never publish it, it was maybe only a couple months of your life that you burned making it.
Yeah.
Do you take breaks from longer projects?
Yeah, I used to take breaks. I guess I still do. Now it's usually when something's going poorly in a longer project, I'll try something shorter. And if that goes poorly, then I'll go back to the longer project. Yeah. There used to be more of like a reason for the shift from one to the other. Now it just feels totally haphazard. And also some ideas for me are just, they need to be short. Whatever comes out of them needs to be under 20 pages or it'll overstay its welcome.
It's like a Zoom call. You gotta, like, after a while, you gotta end the thing.
Yes, right. We said earlier that 1 hour on Zoom is like 100 hours. For some short stories, especially the kind I write, 10 pages is like 100 pages. And so you want to be aware of that.
Right.
Because your audience sure as hell will be. Yeah, so do you read mostly novels now, or are you mostly?
No, I still read lots and lots of nonfiction, especially for my work. You know, just like I was describing, trying to figure out what the Middle Ages looked like. What were the superstitions? You know, what journals can I find? There are very few, but there are some. About the third of the book is set in Constantinople, right before it becomes Istanbul, and the Ottomans come in. And so, you know, just figuring out like, what did that May look like? You know, that'll take me a week sometimes, just reading these journals of the siege of 1453. And I love that stuff. So novels for me are usually like the 20 minutes before bed when I'm just trying to quiet my mind, or sometimes I'll read poetry collections or short story collections. Often, you know, you're getting asked in really nice ways to blurb books. So you get, I'm sure you can relate, books sent to you. And so, you know, sometimes you're like, okay, I really should try to, you know, especially if it's a writer of color or a young writer, this is her first book. And especially now in this Corona world, trying to get a first-time writer attention, even if my stupid blurb gets 2 more readers to buy the book, it might be worth it. So sometimes I'll read that stuff before bed.
Yeah. What
How about you?
I mostly read fiction, in part because I often don't know where to look in nonfiction. So I would love to read these books that you're reading about. What was the Siege of Constantinople? What year was it?
1453. Yeah, it's so interesting. And for 10 years I wrote a review of science books, a column for the Boston Globe. So I got sent, and still occasionally get sent, science books. So I get tons of them sent to the house, and that was always helpful. So like I'm reviewing 2 memoirs by planetary scientists who happen to be women for the New York Times. I think that's due in June 6th or something. So I'm reading those 2 books right now. And those are books like I would never ordinarily read. And so I like taking on those assignments because they force you to read a book that maybe, you wouldn't think you would normally pick up. And then you're 20 pages in and you totally love it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I actually just read, I'm going to blank on the title. It's a book about this Danish group of explorers, incompetent ones. And I'm forgetting the century, but they basically are traveling to Yemen.
Okay, cool.
And they go through all sorts of plagues, literal and figurative. And it's a remarkable book. And it's basically a story about incompetence, but it's also a story about one person's stick-to-itiveness. And it's often really funny, but it's really dark also. And it's called Felix Arabia. And which is what the name was at that time of, at least the mythical name of Yemen at that time, which was totally the opposite of what they discovered. And it's a really great book. And I found it because I was in a bookstore and I was like, oh, I like the look of that cover, like the most base thing imaginable. But yeah, that's one of the great pleasures, is just stumbling upon something. Yeah. And so actually,
and I miss that now because that's something you can do in person. You can do it in libraries, and libraries are opening, but going to a bookstore, trying to support an independent bookstore by just buying some random book. I love that.
I do too. And in fact, I thought this was a great discovery. So I mentioned it to a mutual friend of ours, Mike Paterniti, who's a nonfiction writer. And he immediately sent me a picture of the book. And I was like, damn it. So this book. I thought it was the only one. Tony, we have a bunch of questions here.
Yeah, let's do some questions.
Let me get at them. All right. So this is from Sarah. Nope. Yeah. This is Sarah. This is a test. Yes, I'm going to ask it anyways. It's actually not from Sarah. It's from Fred Hill. First part of the question, how did you come up with the idea for The Caretaker, which is, as you know, a story in the Shell Collector? And was the story at all a catalyst for All the Light We Cannot See?
Okay, 2-part question. Coming up with the story of The Caretaker is not an easy, short answer, but it's a story that's about a Liberian refugee who travels to Oregon and finds beached whales and buries the heart of one and makes a garden. That sounds...
Yeah, that's it.
I take heart in the summaries of all of my work are extremely strange sounding. I took 4 APs in high school. There are plenty of Bowdoin people who I'm sure can identify with that. And so I only had to go to Bowdoin for 3.5 years. I only had to pay for Bowdoin for 3.5 years. And so I went to Africa on a NOLS course, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School, during the spring of my sophomore year. I think that was about 3 months. And then the dollar got crazy strong during that time. It's probably 93. And so I traveled in Africa after that. I was 19 and dumb and fearless-ish, a lot more ready to sleep in uncomfortable places than I am now, when I'm like, what's the thread count of these sheets? I slept in a sleeping bag every night. And then I fell in love with the writer Barry Lopez and was reading his accounts of beached whales around the same time I started to work on that. So I had my journals from Africa, and I was reading about beached whales and just how interesting it is. Like, we still don't really understand why. Is it, traffic of boats? Is it mass suicide? Is it noise? Noise in the oceans? Why do perfectly healthy animals sometimes beach themselves beside animals who may be having health problems? And so for some reason, and I often do this, I decided to see if I could fuse these 2 seemingly unrelated interests. One of which was there's this Liberian civil war going on, and here I am at Bowdoin playing beer pong and studying constitutional law. And, there's people, really, really horrific things when you read the United Nations reports of the crimes going on there. And then you know, something about those two things linked for me. I'm not sure I ever pulled that story off or not, but that's what I tried to do. And I don't know, if everything I suppose is an underpinning for your next work. So maybe I was planting the seeds for All the Light We Cannot See without realizing it. But those traces you can see more in a book called Memory Wall, where I start working in shorter titled sections, something I've been doing a lot lately, present tense, short titled sections. I think then you can see the progress towards trying to build a novel rather than short stories or novella out of short.
Yeah, I remember you talking about this, I think when you first came here, since I got here, so it might have been, actually I can look at the poster, 2011, where you were still working on All the Light We Cannot See, and you were talking about it as the only way you're getting through it, that is the writing of it, is that with the short sections.
Yeah.
That made it seem like this incredible task was doable because you were doing it in increments, right?
Absolutely. That's how you fill the bowl with berries, is you pick one little huckleberry at a time. Because if you're like, I have to pick 10 gallons of huckleberries, you're never going to get there.
That's totally right. Don't think about the bowl, just think about the tiny berries. And yeah, that's
one at a time. You know, we had little tiny kids at that time too, so that's part of it. But I think, you know, what humans can accomplish just through incremental work is pretty amazing.
Yeah. And I think it also is true that people would see connections between not just your work, but mine and everyone else's probably that you yourself don't always see.
Like, yeah, what do you think? It's so interesting, right?
Yeah,
like maybe is back to New England now or something.
Exactly, you know? Right. If you were aware of it, then you would not let yourself do it, probably.
Right. Yeah. Well, Flannery O'Connor said to ask a writer how she writes is like asking a fish how it swims, something like that. And you don't want to be too conscious of some of those things. Like, why are you interested in certain things? Analyzing that too closely can sometimes be a little paralyzing.
Right. This is what I teach my students all the time. It's hard to teach, but what makes a writer interesting is their obsessions. And their obsessions are their own obsessions, which is what makes them interesting. If they're trying to do what other people are doing, that's a kind of ridiculous thing to want to do. I mean, you have to learn how other people do them. It doesn't mean you should want to do the same thing.
Absolutely. But that's part of maturity. You know, imitation is often a lot of part of people's artistic journeys. And that's part of it. You know, you read Hemingway, you're like, no, I'm going to write these little short, clean, adjective-free sentences. And then suddenly you read Virginia Woolf and you're like, oh, it's all about mimicking the patterns of the mind. And that's stuff you have to go through, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Pam Moore is asking this question. Please describe the research you did, where, what libraries, which subjects, etc., to get to the point when you felt ready to write. And then she asked a follow-up question, which is, I think she's talking probably about the most recent novel. Did any character require more research than another? Was any character more difficult to portray in the way you wished?
Yeah. Well, hopefully I can kind of help demolish a fallacy there, which is like, you should do all your research, finish it, like finish the research phase and then write. Because often research is procrastination for me, and I can do that for a really long time. And you have to get going on your narrative before you understand all the things it is that you have to research. You know, I don't know that, say, stockings aren't going to be available in Saint-Malo in 1943. So that's one of the things that Madame Manec's compatriots are going to complain about until I've got those ladies sitting around a table in 1943. And then I'm like, okay, wait, what things were available and what did ration cards really mean? And then you go dig through somebody's diary, and the next thing you know, something happens in that diary. They're like, oh, they left a bag of poo on the commandant's doorstep. Like, that's going in my novel. And so there's this wonderful serendipity of you look for one thing and you find other things. And so I would advise, if Pam, is it Pam? Is that right?
Pam is, yes, Pam.
If she's a writer and thinking about her own way, don't research to the point where you feel like you have to understand everything about a subject before you begin. Just get going. You'll quickly reach sentence 4 where you don't know what the pharmacy looks like in 1943. And then you go look at pictures of it. And sometimes, unfortunately, then you fall into this whirlpool of, I just looked at 38 pictures of pharmacies in 1943 and now it's lunch. Oh, I think I'm gonna go home, go for a bike ride, and then your day's over. So sometimes you just say, oh, she saw blank in the window. It smelled like blank. And then you keep going with your story, and later you dig those things out. And mostly I was using libraries in the United States. I had a fellowship at Princeton and a fellowship at the American Academy in Rome. So I was in Rome. And then sometimes, you can find stuff at home, just on the internet, photos, Life magazines. sometimes you're just looking for one detail that doesn't seem totally expected. The random loot soldiers grab. It's always so interesting to me. You get one of those things and then you just move on.
Yeah, great. M. King has a question. Have you had particular teachers or mentors who inspired you to write? You talked about your mother in this way, right?
Oh yeah, Mom. But Professor Levine, Dan Levine, he was the best. He's an amazing history teacher. I'm sure many folks remember him, especially a good old class of 95 friends of mine. Yeah, he's a wonderful teacher and so writing based. And him and Alan Wells, who was an incredible teacher, and I think he just retired maybe last year, 2 years ago from Bowdoin.
Last year. Mm-hmm.
These guys taught history, but it was we read so many interesting books. Alan Wells in particular, we read like primarily novels. I'm probably wrong on that, but I want to say it was like 8 out of 10 of the books we'd read in one of his courses were novels. And he would have us do this journal-based feedback. So lots of times, it fit me perfectly because you could just write. It wasn't really a judgment of how well you were writing. It was just what kind of thinking you were doing through writing about books. And so it was a terrific training, even though at that point it was I'd be way too scared to say, oh, Professor, I really want to be a novelist, because that wasn't something kids from Cleveland were allowed to say. But I think that was terrific training for me. Those guys are just great mentors at Bowdoin for me.
Yeah. Do you feel that way now? We got a lot of questions, so maybe I'll make this brief. The reticence to say, I often hesitate before when someone asks, "What do you do?" I was like, I try not to say I'm a writer, not because I think I'm not one or because I'm ashamed of being one, but because two things. It sounds arrogant for some reason, even to me. Maybe because I actually grew up in a pretty literary family, but we grew up in a mill town in the middle of nowhere, and that was not a thing one ever said.
Right.
Yeah, but also because I don't know. Yeah, for me, it's often a very private thing. Like I don't really want to talk to you, not you, that person, about being a writer. Maybe I'm just insane about this.
No, I feel identical. I feel the exact same way. Like, I'm a big fan of keeping the headphones on when you sit down in the airplane seat, just because I don't really want to go there. Especially as maybe, some folks remember something bad happens at the end of All the Light We Cannot See, and lots of readers want to yell at me about this thing that happens at the end. So, eventually you're like, I just kind of want to get through this flight. Thanks.
All right. This is John Simmons. Can you share this question about publishers? Are publishers trying to steer you into doing more of the same that's worked out well? Like, yeah, I'm curious about the relation, your editor's reaction to this book. Was it the same editor as on your previous book? It was. Okay. Yeah,
I have just been so blessed. You've been with Algonquin for a lot of books too, right?
This is my 5th. Yeah. So, and I've been lucky too to have someone who actually gets what I'm trying to do and wants me to do it. So, yeah.
So, I've only published 5 books, and all 5 have been with the same editor, same publisher, Scribner, and my editor's Nan Graham. She's incredible. She's so brilliant. So thankfully, that's 21 years, I think, 22 years since Shell Collector, something like that. So, it's that continuity is rare in the publishing industry. At least women have been in power in the publishing industry a lot more than other industries. So there have been women with long tenures like that, but Nan has just been phenomenal. And so, I sent her the new book. It's just so comforting. And she puts zero pressure on me in terms of capitalism whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I know that those meetings happen over Zoom right now, but they would cause me to have a panic attack. So thankfully, I just don't have to tune into that. They send you royalty reports and all that stuff, but mostly I can just make what it is I want to make. And then you do help your team. You try to help your publisher figure out ways to get readers to pick that up. But I know that there is a lot of pressure on young writers to be on social media, to build platforms and think about that stuff. I tend to think of that as just destructive. Like that doesn't help you make your work better. Maybe it does, and I'm just too old-fashioned to get that. But if you only have 100 marbles of energy in a day and 70 of them are on your family and mowing your lawn and getting groceries, and you only have 30 left to do your creative work, you don't want to spend 15 of those on like, what am I going to tweet today about my book? Certainly, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We could do cranky middle-aged men thing all day about this, but we're going to spare everyone. Aaron Rohr says, are there any books that you read as a child or a teenager that you still find inspiring?
Yeah, that's a nice question. Well, the big ones for me when I was a child were the Chronicles of Narnia. I had two older brothers, and Mom read us all those books, and I was just blown away. The idea that these worlds existed only in these books, and that these kids could step through a wardrobe into another kingdom. There's a metaphor for reading in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying very clearly, how did they do this, Mom? Like, what are they thinking? And she'd say, well, it's just one person who made these and he's dead. And you're like, wait, what? Like the whole idea that was so alive and colorful in my mind that some nights I'd rather be in Narnia than be in my real life. Mm-hmm. And that he, built those things with these cheap materials like we were talking about. There's something addictive about that. So I haven't gone back and visited those since the kids were little, but they still inspired me when I was reading to my boys. And I think, those books, hopefully they stand up.
Yeah, I did the same. They did 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So, okay. Someone who knows you, I think, Sajjad.
Oh, Sajjad, of course. Yeah.
I vividly remember sharing my story as Bowdoin international student from Tanzania while lining up for dinner at Cole's Tower. Where'd you go here? What was it like for you when you first visited Africa and then wrote The Shell Collector?
Oh, hi, Sajjad. That's so nice. I don't know. I mean, that's like asking a visitor what your hometown looks like. For me, I was just so, you're just so privileged, just always living, in Cleveland, at least there's lots and lots of mixed race, but I went to a private school. So a lot of the kids were white. And then I go to Bowdoin, and at least we had like 2 non-Eurocentric classes we had to take. But, it's like Hawthorne, Longfellow are speaking to you from 2 sides of campus, and we're reading a lot of white writers. And so going to Africa was just so good for me. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how, when, you're walking down the streets in Nairobi, you're like, oh, this is how a person with black skin might feel when they're in Portland, Maine. And, that was just so good for me. And then, discovering Chinua Achebe, people who, writers that people would talk about while I was over there. It's just, those experiences are so important. I hope they can continue as soon as we get a vaccine or sooner, so that students, at least if they have the antibodies, can continue to travel, whether it's through travel abroad programs or on their own, like I was doing. Those are such formative experiences.
Yeah, right. Erin Bernstein, when I was the biochemistry major science guy editor at the Quill at Bowdoin, we tried hard to wrestle submissions from students. Okay, I'm looking for this. You mentioned about fear of failure, I think informed that. We tried to help make it seem that publishing was not a conclusion, but a point in time in the process. What got you either past the first initial times when you read your own published work and suddenly realized it may have not been what you wanted? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hi, Erin. That's great. Yeah, it's hard because publishing seems, especially growing up, you feel like books grow on trees, and to be published seems like this humongous thing. And then you have to realize that humans make them, and humans are fallible. And every writer is embarrassed by some of her earlier books and proud of some of them. And then those feelings might change as the decades passed. I remember Joyce Carol Oates revising one of her older books when it was re-released, I think for a 25th anniversary. And so, yeah, I absolutely understand what you're saying. I think sometimes you just publish the work that you believe in at that moment. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about being at the Quill, or especially at the Orient, is, you have these deadlines and you've got to produce something. And that's a great lesson, because you can keep tinkering and tinkering and tinkering, trying to make something feel perfect and final. But in the magazine world, especially the newspaper world, you just have to get it done.
Yeah, that's right. Question here from a student of mine, Hannah Cohn, who says, hi, she just graduated. Hi, Tony, my name is Hannah. I'm from Sun Valley, Idaho. We met a couple summers ago through my local library, and you gave an amazing talk about the defense of similes. Could you reflect on your opinions on similes in relation to the idea that language maybe can't properly capture anything we're trying to write about?
Hi, Hannah. That's great. So you're Sun Valley. All right.
Yeah. Hey, Hannah.
I got a chance to do a talk for the community library up here. They were trying to do an annual talk where they bring a writer in. And I just started, it's writers like Brock, and this book, you've got some great similes in that book. It really was, I was reading Rachel Cusk, and she has a book called Outline. She can just kill similes. She's a very, very interesting writer. I advise people to check her out, but she's the queen of similes, or the king. She's the best is living right now. And that little bridge of connectivity that a simile represents, for me, kind of represents literature as a whole in a way. It takes your mind somewhere unexpected, and it kind of trains your imagination to make a leap. The similes that are boring for me are the ones that, busy as a bee, something that I've already kind of know where it's going. It's a little expected. But busy as a mailman, or I don't know, something a little less expected. Suddenly you're making that little tiny one connection in this huge network of connections. And that's what literature is. A novel is this big brain of connectivity, and it teaches you to leap from your mind into another mind and into another life. And that's so necessary right now. I mean, we've just reached 100,000 Americans dead from this virus. And it seems like some of our leaders are having a very hard time identifying with the families who are losing people. And that's what literature can do, is train you in empathy. There are many other ways to train yourself in empathy, of course.
Yeah, that's right. So people think about similes and metaphors as just being, rhetorical devices, but they're actually rhetorical devices that actually help connect things that might not be connected. This is not like a small thing. It's a big thing. You're exactly right about that.
I agree totally. You're building a substructure, or maybe an overstructure around the story to build this kind of metaphorical, it's not just filigree, it's like this huge lattice of connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that reading helps train you to build those things.
It's really right. So I get a little testy sometimes when people make grand claims about books, because they're often not built on stuff. But one of the things I think books can do is allow or make you see big leaps between things that you would not be able to see otherwise.
TV shows don't have similes in them. I love television shows, but we really have this unique ability to harness all five senses and mimic the patterns of thought and use metaphor to, meta means across, and what is it? Metaphor. It means to carry you across, like St. Christopher carrying Christ across the river. So for must mean to ferry across. And so it's kind of like a way to move you across the river each time there's a metaphor. And then the larger metaphors inside a book are these bigger carryings across.
Yeah. So we're about out of time. So I'm going to ask one last question from Teresa Liu, who's asked, are there any new authors or poets on your radar? Because we talked earlier about how important it is to keep reading. And for me, the most important thing is to keep reading, or to read younger writers. And one often needs advice, right? Like, who are the writers I should be reading? So any younger writers, poets, fiction writers that you're especially into?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, this is the time when your brain always just totally blanks on the stuff right up on your nightstand. But there's a writer so I just edited the Best American Short Stories last year, and a great exercise in that was reading so many writers younger than me who I hadn't read before. And there's a writer named Weike Wang, W-E-I-K-E-W-A-N-G. She's brilliant. I picked one of her stories. Then I bought a novel called Chemistry that she wrote. I think it was maybe her only novel so far. And very controlled, very, I just really admire these stories seem very simple. The one I picked for Best American's about just a couple having dinner, having sushi and omakase.
Omakase, I teach that story all the time.
Oh, cool. Yeah. It just seems so simple, but there's so much in it. And it's also there's a new social awareness, and there's almost an education of the reader along the way inside of the story. And so this whole realm of fiction can't be political. It's a good story to pick for that kind of lesson.
And that's also a good lesson about how students can teach you stuff. So I taught that for the first time, I guess, last year. And I thought it was going to be one of these great gifts to my students. Like, oh, this new writer that you're really going to love. And one of my students saw the syllabus and he was like, oh, she's one of my favorite writers. And I was like, God damn it. You know more than I do about this, which is great. It's like great.
Totally.
Yeah. How about one more question, Tony?
Okay, sure.
Brody, can we ask one more?
Yeah.
This is one more question about...
Oh, I see Anthony Molinari on there. We don't have to do his question. Would you ever write a script? But I love you, Molly. Love your family. Be well. I feel like he's in the movie industry, and I feel so much for all my friends and those industries where the collaborative arts, where you just can't be close to each other to make your work right now. We're just so blessed that we get to be able to be alone making our stuff. So I hope.
Let me ask this question then, which is basically, would you ever write a script for a feature film or transform one of your books into a movie?
I probably wouldn't. When I finish something, it's already, you've worked so much on it. By the time it's through the third edit and then copy edits and fact checking, you just feel like that story, I'm ready to move on and make new stories. And I've never studied it. I've never taken a class in screenwriting. I don't fully understand the medium. I don't get, like, if to make all the light, you have to blow up a town. Like, I don't know how expensive that is. And I get to blow up a town and it costs nothing. I get to have a character like Marie in that novel. She ages 70 years or whatever. I don't have to worry about, like, is that two different actors? Like, how do we do makeup? And so thankfully, I think I just get to use language and it's always free. So I would, there's guys who are working on, guys and gals working on the teleplay. Is that what it's called? They're trying to make a series out of All the Light. I think it's 6 episodes right now, 1 hour each. But I wrote that story now 5 years ago. I finished that story. So it would be hard for me to dive back into the nuts of it. I
bet. So do you know if that for sure is going to be made, or I don't
know.
Okay.
I wish them every success, and they'll send an email like maybe every 3 months. I hope, because one of my sons likes filming, he's really good at film editing. I hope maybe that, that's like the one favor I would ask, is if I can get my son somehow on the set, if they do go ahead and make that. But unlike a lot of writers, it's not like my heart will be broken if they don't make it. I'd be really excited if they make it and it's beautiful. That would be exciting. But The Shell Collector was made into a Japanese film, and they invited me to the premiere. I couldn't go. There's something weird about it. I couldn't even watch. They sent me the DVD, and I'm so grateful to them, but I don't know. I can't even watch the DVD. It's probably weird.
Yeah, it's weird for me even to hear books on tape made out of my books, because the voices are often, I've never done one of my own, so the voices often are just not what I had in mind, and so I can't listen to them.
Yeah. Jess Walter, if you know him, he wrote Beautiful Ruins. He says to hear the audiobook of his books is like watching another guy make out with his wife.
I would search for another analogy, but still, I get it.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're out of time. This has been great.
Thanks so much, and I'm sorry that we didn't all get to be together, all these reunions, and I wish everybody the best, and thanks for supporting Bowdoin, and hopefully someday we can all go to Giant Stairs and Harpswell and be in the sun.
Yeah.
All hug each other and high five.
Well, Brock and Tony, thank you very much. I've been laughing and smiling through this whole thing. You two look like you're having a ball doing this. I'm really sorry that we're not all in a building together or out on the lawn together at Bowdoin, where we could keep this going and actually talk to you in person. But this has been fantastic. We have had over 300 people on this chat this afternoon, which is fantastic. And I am quite sure that every single one of them have enjoyed it as much as I have and are joining me in thanking you for this. And Tony, wishing you a happy 25th reunion. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Rhodey. I can't do the math fast enough on your class, but you said
40, Tony. Yeah. Well, thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend, and please do everything you can to stay safe. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
See you, Tony.
Bye, Brock. Thanks, buddy.
Yep.